I wanted to ask you what level of concern you have with the fresh cluster of cases in Beijing, and when you talked about the more than 300 cases, did you include any deaths inside? And about the investigation, is it done by the Chinese authorities or someone else? Thank you.
Marie will speak. I don't believe any deaths have been reported in association with the disease, and as is normal, sovereign countries investigate and respond to epidemics on their territory and request assistance from WHO as needed. We are always, and in every case when there's an epidemic or a new epidemic in countries, we always offer assistance, technical, operational and logistic as needed. In this particular case, and I think in the case of this response, I think Chinese authorities, as many countries around the world, again like Korea, like Japan, like so many other countries, have learned many lessons in the last 6 months in how to handle COVID all over the world, and I think have built significant capacity in doing that. However, we will continue to monitor the situation, continue to offer that assistance and continue to make information available to the international community as we do for all other countries. Maria?
Yeah. Case numbers, it was over 100 cases that we reported as part of the cluster. But just to say about are we concerned, we're always concerned for clusters. You know, in every country, in any country, wherever we hear of a clustering of cases, I mean, first and foremost, I should say every single case of COVID-19 is significant, and every single case needs to be followed up and cared for appropriately. But clusters are a special condition, because in any country, we need to understand why is there the clustering? What brought these cases together? Is it related to an expat dormitory? Is it related to a healthcare facility? Is it related to a long-term care facility or a school or whatever it may be? Because that will help us understand it and bring it under control. So any cluster raises our concern, as it does in all countries. And as Mike has said, we've seen officials take this seriously and do a proper investigation, as we are seeing in other countries that are seeing these cases. We are witnessing many countries apply the fundamentals of public health, of outbreak investigation, which public health professionals are trained to do, to find cases, to understand the extent of infection by doing active testing, and to follow up on all of the cases and contacts and care for anyone that is ill. My understanding is that there are no deaths associated so far, but of course, as Mike has said, we will monitor the situation as we do in all countries.
Further add, I think obviously these events are a threat in their own right, and no one likes to see them, but they do offer opportunities to understand disease transmission and to understand the circumstances and the context and the behaviours in which disease transmits more readily. And I would point you to, we've had some excellent articles come out in the last couple of days, one in the MMWR from the CDC in Atlanta, from Fruz and et al., Japanese colleagues who've done extensive cluster-based investigations looking for specific risk factors and specific situations and behaviours and contexts in which transmission has been generated in clusters. That's what we need to know. We need to have our scientists around the world investigating clusters, seeing what's driving infection. We have a lot of speculation around what's driving infection, what's causing this, what's causing that, and that's important. It's important for us to hypothesize. It's important for us to make models about what might be happening. But the answers lie in careful, systematic, exhaustive investigation of disease clusters to really look at what is happening in these situations and then what is causing amplification of disease in the human context. And if we get that, we will build up a much better picture of the public health advice we need to give our communities on what behaviours to avoid, on what places to avoid, on what circumstances to avoid, and for us in public health to have better policies to guide governments. So I do think this is an important issue in as much as it demonstrates that rapid response to contain clusters and systematic, thorough investigation of those clusters is both a public health act to stop the disease, but an act of public health discovery to understand how this disease transmits in these circumstances.
We have Chen online. Chen?
Hi, yeah,
My question is also related to Beijing. I'm actually based here in Brussels, so the EU border is opening today, but countries like Germany, France still report like 300, 400 cases every day. And in the US, you have 18, 20 states have a spike, like 1,000 cases or more a day. So why make Beijing's 100 cases particular deserve so much attention? Is Beijing overreacting or is acting properly? Thank you.
I think it's important to note that every country is different, and certainly in China, when you spent over 50 days without having any significant local transmission, a cluster like this is a concern. And it needs to be investigated and controlled, and that's exactly what the Chinese authorities are doing. So in that sense, it is big news, but in the great scheme of things around the number of cases per day around the world, it's not. But it is a significant event. We'll track that like we've tracked other significant clusters. Similarly, we've been concerned about clusters that have emerged in Korea or in Japan or in Singapore, and we engage very closely with those authorities to understand how they're investigating them. That doesn't mean we think the authorities are going to lose control of the situation. It's that we want to understand what the country is doing, and more importantly, what the country is learning about the origin and transmission. A separate situation is countries, for example, as you've mentioned, in Europe, who are currently exiting some lockdowns and opening up their borders. They're engaged in a careful process of lifting restrictions that is balanced with the risk of disease against the promotion of lives and livelihoods and pulling their economies back on track. And in doing that, they're measuring their lifting of restrictions with the decreases in incidence of disease. But no countries have reached that zero incidence, and that's a very difficult objective to reach before you exit lockdowns. In fact, that's not what was envisaged in the planning process for transitioning from lockdowns. What you need to have is sustained control over the virus and be able to get to a position where you can then safely exit lockdown while maintaining the measures like surveillance and other measures in order to sustain control of the virus. So careful opening of countries and opening of their borders with neighbouring countries is something that can be done, but again must be done in a measured, planned, stepwise fashion, with always putting in place the public health and other measures needed to be able to make up for the restrictions of movement and the restrictions of lockdowns. Thank you.